and welcome to Queer New Worlds, the podcast where we explore sci-fi through queer eyes and boldly go where no gay has gone before. I'm JJ, I'm your host, your non-binary navigator, and a lifelong sci-fi fan who always felt a little bit alien. Each week I'll beam up a new theme of queerness in sci-fi, from campy villains to chosen families among the stars, and I'll rank a few pop culture icons on the camp-o-meter just to keep things fabulously scientific. So if you want some camp with your cryosleep and some quantum with your queer, this is the show for you. And let's be honest, sci-fi is already pretty camp and pretty queer. But it's not just about me. You're a crucial part of this. You can get involved by dropping a comment below or sending us an email to queernewworldspod@gmail.com with your ideas and your questions. You can connect with us on socials at queernewworlds on Blue Sky, Instagram and TikTok, or visit our website queernewworlds.com. There'll be a new episode of the pod available on Spotify and YouTube every Friday. In this first episode of the pod, the theme is We're All Aliens Here, exploring the relationship between queerness and alienness, and how feeling different has always been a common part of both sci-fi and the queer experience. So let's get right into it. And really, this is a key reason I wanted to make this pod. For me, and I'm sure for many queer folks out there, growing up you feel different somehow. I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s in the UK at a time when being gay was seen as bad or toxic. Section 28 was in place, which was a piece of government legislation that prohibited schools from promoting homosexuality by teaching or publishing material. I mean, this basically meant that any discussion of homosexuality was forbidden and seen as a bad thing. This legislation was in place until I was about 16, and the repercussions of it still continued for quite some time after that. So it was definitely problematic growing up as a confused youngster in that hostile environment. Who do you talk to when you're questioning your identity, but being anything other than normal is wrong? For me, seeing otherness being represented on screen or in media as an alien life form felt weirdly relatable, whether or not the characters themselves were explicitly queer. The appeal was that those others were often accepted with open arms, or at the very least acknowledged, the kind of validation we all need. I grew up watching Star Trek Voyager and The Next Generation, so thanks, Dad. Those shows were crucial for me in my formative years. There are many memorable characters, and I'll talk about many of them in future episodes, but the one that particularly stood out to me was Seven of Nine, the Borg-human hybrid who's initially cold and distant, doesn't really fit in, yet soon establishes herself as a key member of the crew. This common trope of modern storytelling is often deployed as an allegory for queerness. We see it in older media too, and perhaps the best known example from Star Trek is Spock from the original series, Chief Science Officer and part of the Golden Trio alongside Captain Kirk and Bones the Doctor. But Spock is from Vulcan, a world very different from Earth. His otherness is visible both in his behaviour and in his appearance, with his trademark pointy ears and his angled eyebrows. One of the first true aliens I saw in movies was E.T., the extraterrestrial, a character beloved by children and adults across the world for his charm and sensitivity. He quickly forms a deep bond with Elliot, despite not speaking the same language or really understanding what is going on. And Elliot cares for him and protects him. Yet, even as a rotund little alien with gangly limbs, he's not immune from being queer-coded. Director Steven Spielberg described him as neither male nor female. His sex is a key question from the scientists who want to dissect him, and at one point Elliot's sister dresses him up in a dress and makeup, seeing him as a girl, whilst the boys read this as drag. Whilst the core plot of the movie is E.T. as a lost alien seeking to find his way home, he discovers a version of home along the way in his relationship with Elliot, his heart glowing in his presence. It can be read as a platonic love story, an interspecies romance, or simply found family. All three of these characters are examples of alienness being both explicit and implicit. All three of them have underlying queer coding, which we'll dig into in more detail, and all three of them are accepted as who they are, quirks and foibles and all. Their otherness is integral to their character, simultaneously part of their charm and appeal, as well as a source of anxiety and in some cases disgust from other characters. This is an extremely relatable dichotomy for a queer audience, particularly with very few examples of overt and positive queerness in modern media. There's also a very good case to be made that these characters are coded as neurodivergent, displaying many similarities to autism and ADHD amongst others, but that's the topic for another time. For many queer or questioning people, seeing this kind of representation frequently raises that common question of, do I want to be with them or be them? I.e. the sexy aliens, characters deliberately created for their sex appeal, even if their sexuality was implied or ambiguous. The most impactful examples of this for me growing up were, of course, 7 of 9, we've talked about her, and also Frank and Werther from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Totally opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how visible their sexuality was. I don't think we ever got direct confirmation of whether Seven was asexual, lesbian, bisexual, or straight, despite all the fan theories. Compared to Frank, who is probably one of the most openly queer characters there has ever been. He creates himself a man in the image of perfect masculinity, whilst also sleeping around with male and female characters in the show, and then hosting an orgy with his alien counterparts at the end of the movie. I mean, the plot and subtext of this is a whole other podcast episode, but you get the idea. And by the way, if you haven't seen Rocky Horror, go and do that. Do that right now. It's an iconic movie. And queer aliens are prevalent in video games too. Playing Mass Effect for the first time in my 20s, I was struck by how Liara is distinctly written as other in terms of her niche interest in archaeology and technology, and in her background being stigmatised by her people for the circumstances of her birth. Her troubled past and independent nature combined with her emotional vulnerability are classic signifiers of queerness, but she's also written as explicitly queer. Liara is a classic, beautiful blue alien whose race, the Asari, form romantic and sexual relationships with all genders and all species. And yes, having chosen a femshep as my starting character, you bet I took the opportunity to romance Liara in my first playthrough. She's hot, she's smart, and she was suffering an identity crisis just like I was. So we've identified a spectrum of queerness in popular media and a handful of characters that embody different points on that spectrum. But in order to properly evaluate them, it's time for our first feature, the Campometer, where I'll give my very individual opinion of just how gay and camp popular characters from sci-fi are. Okay, so the way this works, each week I will add several characters to the Campometer, judging if they're more or less queer than the others. As you can see, there are 6 categories ranging from still in the closet, baby gay, up to iconic diva. You get the idea. We'll examine the evidence to determine just how gay they are, and then I'll put them in a category I think best captures their queerness based on vibes. It's super scientific. So drop me a comment below whether you agree or disagree with my opinions here. I'd love to hear your takes. So for today's Campometer, I'm going to be judging all 5 characters I've mentioned here. So Frank, 7 of 9, Spock, Liara, and E.T. The first thing I'd like to say is they're all kind of camp, some pretty camp, but they're also pretty different as well. And before we get started, it should be obvious, but there will be spoilers ahead. So if you haven't seen any of these characters before, if you're new to some of these sci-fi areas, Go read up about it, watch some of them. There are spoilers. Okay, so let's get into it. First up, we have Frank. And I'm just going to dive straight in here and put him as an iconic diva. And honestly, I don't think anyone is going to disagree with that. And again, second time I'm plugging this. If you haven't seen Rocky Horror, you really should. What are you even doing here? Pause this video, watch it, and then come back to fully appreciate this analysis. So let's take a look at why I think Frank is so gay.
How'd you do, I see you've met my faithful hand in hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure I need to say much more, to be honest. Just to give you a bit of background, he is part mad scientist, part drag act, and Frank exudes sexuality and otherness to the extreme. He's surrounded by other queer aliens, yet somehow still steals the limelight in every scene. He's visually queer, from over-the-top makeup and hair to the absurd costumes. He's a flamboyant performer. But more than that, he completely subverts gender norms. He wears a corset and suspenders to visually signify femininity, while still retaining and expressing his masculinity. And eagle-eyed viewers amongst us will notice that he has a pink triangle sewn into his medical apron, and that itself is a subverted symbol of queerness. So the pink triangle has its origins in Nazi concentration camps in the 1930s and 40s. It was used as a visual identifier of homosexuality, and often included others considered as sexual deviants. But the historical symbol was displayed with the point down. Frank's badge is point up, displaying it more as a symbol of pride, not shame. He wears his queerness loudly and proudly, and it's over his heart. Loud and proud too is his sexuality. Whilst he's designed himself the perfect man in Rocky, with whom he's unabashedly obsessed, he flirts with his alien entourage, winks, pouts, and caresses at them. And he even hops into bed with each member of the boring straight couple who find themselves lost in this campy chaos. But he wears his heart on his sleeve. He expresses jealousy and obsession when the perfect man he's created sleeps with Janet. He's highly dramatic in his gestures, his reactions, and his expressiveness. And there is a level of deviance about him, with his propensity to cannibalism and revenge. Towards the end of the movie, he leads a cabaret floor show with his guests dressed in drag. What starts as a performative debauchery soon descends into a wet and wild orgy as Frank swims half naked with the others before eventually meeting his demise. So there's some tragedy there as well as the love. And I think he pretty much ticks every box on the queer symbolism list. His characters had a huge impact on both queer culture and cult sci-fi. And so for that reason, he goes right to the top as my first iconic diva. Next up, we have probably the polar opposite to Frank, which is E.T. the extraterrestrial. And I bet when you started listening to this podcast, you did not expect to hear a comparison between these two characters. They are worlds apart. So E.T. might be less obvious as a queer-coded character, but there are still elements there. He's definitely an other, both in terms of being a literal alien, as well as being lost and wanting to find his way home. He causes fear and discomfort in those who are unfamiliar with him, yet he forms a close bond with Elliot and his chosen family. And at this point, I should say that although he's commonly referred to as he, him, as I said earlier, he actually has no specific gender in the way that we understand it. So that makes him non-binary, at the very least. He does look good in drag, though, and he also doesn't particularly care what he is perceived as. So whilst there are fewer obvious signs of queerness in E.T., for instance, he's not really a villain or a deviant, he doesn't have an overtly flamboyant or theatrical appearance or behaviour, and his language is limited at best. His intense emotional connection with Elliot against the backdrop of the homophobic jokes and humour from Elliot's brother and friends hints at a queer, or certainly non-standard, relationship. One that is tragically ended when E.T. finally gets home. So for these reasons, I think it's safe to say E.T. is a little bit gay, but he's probably still in the closet, so we'll put him down there. Okay, now back to Star Trek and the characters of Spock and Seven of Nine. So they're similar in some ways. Their biology marks them as others, both visually and behaviourally. So Spock has mixed parentage, human and Vulcan, and Seven, from her part, assimilation by the Borg. There are homoerotic undertones in their relationships with their colleagues. So Spock has a strong connection with Captain Kirk, both his close friend and confidant. He dives in front of a poison plant to save his life. And then there's this exchange where it is highly implied that they are both having inappropriate thoughts.
Dangerous if we happen to be thinking about...
Yes, we must all control our thoughts.
Difficult.
And last but not least, I can't not mention the infamous episode with this scene in it, the episode called Patterns of Force, where for some reason they are both half naked and touching. So, yeah. Aside from her otherness, Seven, for her part, has a much less obvious queer coding. Some fans in the 90s wanted her bond with Janeway to turn into something romantic, and whilst they definitely both had a high degree of admiration and respect for one another, it never quite made it to a canon relationship. Seven likely saw Janeway as a mother figure, but you can't deny the way they look at each other with longing and with affection. And they spent an awful lot of time together for two supposedly busy Starfleet officers. Seven's sexuality is queer-coded in other ways, like her inability to pick up on blatant flirting attempts from Harry Kim, and then her sudden bemused curiosity in exploring human intimacy with him, revealing at least she has a level of aromanticism towards men. There's also the gay romance that never was, because whilst this scene happened, with a kiss between Seven and Raffi, it was left ambiguous, with the characters opting not to define it, and then their relationship just fizzled out. So I think for both these Star Trek characters, we're in partial sleigh territory. There's certainly more than a little hinting, but with few obvious signs and a lack of consummation of queer relationships, I think that's the best we can really do. And since Spock keeps finding Kirk shirtless and doesn't really seem to know how to handle it, I'm inclined to say he's the gayer of the two, so I'm going to put them over like that. Finally, last but not least, we have our beautiful blue alien Liara. Now, since Liara is explicitly written as queer, it would be very easy to bump her straight to the top of this list. And certainly she is also queer-coded in her backstory. So she's been marginalised from her family, she's a lone soul travelling the galaxy in search of answers, in search of purpose. But her queerness has limitations. Her biology appears to closely match that of human females, despite her insistence that she has no specific gender. And actually, the fact she is genderless means her relationship with Femshep isn't technically gay at all. And further than that, her sexuality can be criticised as being interchangeable with heteronormativity. Asari mating with other Asari is seen as a perversion by Asari themselves. It's actually preferable for them to mate with species that are different to themselves. And this preference for opposite over same can be interpreted as heteronormativity, and is actually in direct conflict to the queer signalling provided by defaulting Liara to female pronouns and appearance, and the ability to romance both male and female humans. In fact, most other Asari in the game are depicted using their sexuality as either eye candy for male audiences, as exotic dancers in the nightclubs, or as dangerous and destructive to male partners, as with the Ardat Yakshi, echoing medieval depictions of the female succubus seducing and then killing men. So it's a mixed bag for me, really, and to be honest, I'm really struggling where to put Liara, because whilst on the surface she reads as queer, and certainly there are layers to her identity, most notably her origin story and her inclination to interests that are seen as other by the characters in-game. With the wider context of her species, the fact that the game mainly caters to the male gaze with heteronormativity present even in the player's character choice, her queerness does not really hold up. So I think she only just tips into Fabulous Darling for me, mainly because I think of all the Asari, Liara is probably, actually definitely, one of the gayest. So what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there any that you'd move up or down? What do you reckon to my assessment of how camp these characters really are? Drop us a comment below. You can email us at queernewworldspod@gmail.com, or you can contact us on socials at queernewworlds on Blue Sky, Instagram and TikTok. And now it's time for our next regular segment on the podcast. And part of it is I want to just experience more sci-fi. Like, I've seen an awful lot of really good sci-fi movies, but I haven't seen every single one that's out there. And there are some really good ones. I want to make sure that we're viewing sci-fi through that queer lens. So I took inspiration from Time Out magazine. They have an article here that has the top 100 sci-fi movies of all time ranked. And what I've decided to do is to, rather than go through it one by one and do it in the rating that they've given it, I have decided to do a random spin of a wheel, which, because it's to do with queer new worlds, we've named the Queel. See what I did there? And all of the movies are listed here on the right hand side with the corresponding place in the ranking. So what we're going to do, I'll spin the wheel. Whichever movie it lands on, that's the movie I will watch before the next pod. And then I'll include a little review of it with my interpretation, let's say, of the queerness of that movie. So with that, I will spin the wheel. What movie are we going to get the first time? There's 100 movies on here, so it could be literally anything. And it has landed on a classic, number 3 in the list, Alien from 1979. Now, I have seen this movie many times before. I am a fan. It won't surprise anyone to know. I'm delighted that this has been chosen, though, because it is such a great movie. So just let's have a quick look at the Time Out review for Alien from 1979, just to see what they say about it and get us hyped for next week. So Alien, it's directed by Ridley Scott, one of the greatest directors of all time, still, I think. And although this review came out just a year ago in September 2024, rated 5 stars and saying that it was the ultimate space horror, still pulsing with unrelenting tension. I mean, that's quite a review, right? But I think it's true. I think it will hold true for a very long time. Alien is, yeah, an absolute classic of the movie. I have seen it many times, it will not surprise you to know, and it is one of my favourite movies. So I'm super excited to watch this for next week with a queer interpretation and decoding some of the subtext that is around this movie. In terms of the details of the movie, so it is a horror as well as a sci-fi, so it's a bit of a crossover of genres there. As I said, directed by Ridley Scott. The screenwriter here was Dan O'Bannon. And the cast, quite small actually, in terms of Hollywood movies. You know, only 7 people in the cast. However, an absolute powerhouse of a cast, because 3 of them were nominated for Oscars, and 2 more, it says here, belong on any cinephile's list of the all-time great character actors. So you've got some amazing talent in this movie, and even the music is incredible. I love everything about it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reviewing this next week on the pod as my first review. And now it's time for your listener questions, theories and confessions from across the galaxy in a segment we call Incoming Transmission. So this week, on the topic of relating to aliens, I've been scouring the socials to find your first or worst alien crush. And first up we have Captain Gantu from Lilo and Stitch, the original daddy with his literal tank top and cuffs, always flexing those muscles. And for the TV version, those abs were always on display. Guy was made swole and you are all thirsty for him. Next up we have Zap Brannigan from Futurama. I mean, he's definitely an ick with the ladies, but he's also sexy as hell and oozing confidence. One person I saw described him as the ultimate himbo, so yeah, that's very apt. And last but not least is Jadzia Dax from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, probably one of the most mysterious and sexy aliens out there. She's gender fluid, she's sexuality fluid, she's smart, she's independent. What's not to love? This is definitely not a worst for me. Dax is amazing and a very complex character to boot. So get in touch, tell me who was your first or worst alien crush and why. The more unhinged the better, I really want to know those worst ones. Drop a comment below, send us an email or a voice note at queernewworldspod@gmail.com, or you can use the hashtag #FirstAlienCrush on socials. You can find us at Queer New Worlds on TikTok, Instagram and Blue Sky. I'll share a few of them in next week's episode. So thanks for joining me on our maiden voyage into Queer New Worlds as we explore themes of loneliness and otherness. Next week, we're going to focus on the question, do robots have gender? And if they don't, why do we keep giving them one? If you have a topic or a question you'd like us to feature on the podcast, you can email us at queernewworldspod@gmail.com, contact us on socials at Queer New Worlds on Blue Sky, TikTok and Instagram, or visit our website queernewworlds.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video, and I'll see you in the next episode. Live fabulous and prosper.